when people are looking for value, looking for identity, and you're over-presented with these ideas, with these repetition of you are an oppressed individual, you will always suffer from these slights and microaggressions in this American society, is that you tend to reduce your identity to your race, which is something called race essentialism. That my skin color accounts for so much that happens in my life. And I think that that's not true. I think you are a full human, whatever color you are, and you are capable of experiencing the range of all humanity, like sadness, love, heartbreak. You can be the oppressor, even as a person with, black skin color.
Kimi Katiti, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Melody. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Me too. There's a lot I want to ask you about, but I want to start with getting your background. You grew up in Uganda and moved to the USA. Can you tell me a little bit more about your upbringing and your experiences?
Yeah, I grew up in Uganda. I was born to an engineer and a mom who works in the airline industry. So I grew up in a busy household. Moved to South Africa when I was about 13 and spent my high school years in South Africa. And when I was 19, I moved to the United States. So I'm 29 now. So I've been in the US for 10 years.
And what are you doing there at the moment?
So right now I work as a creative. I work part-time at like a regular job, but then I also spend a lot of my time working on creative endeavors and projects and doing a range of things. So,
And your YouTube channel.
And my YouTube channel, which at this point is fun.
It is. What inspired that?
I have had my YouTube channel actually for 10 years. So just before I moved to the United States, I was pursuing music at the time, which is another thing I do. And by the way, I do identify as like an interdisciplinary artist. So I create music, I create visual art, like that skateboard deck in the background is some of my visual art. And so right before I was about to leave for the US, I wanted to put some of my kind of covers and rap remixes online in 2012. And since then it's taken on a journey of taking on different shapes, but all of the content is still on there, right? And now it's a platform where I voice my opinions on different things.
I'm interested in, part of the show is I talk about Christianity a lot. I'm a Christian. You have described yourself as a Christian. I'm interested in how you met God. What's your relationship with Jesus like?
Yeah, so I grew up in an Anglican household. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with like the Anglican faith?
Different denominations. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the Church of England. Uganda was colonized by the British. And so they brought in this Anglican faith, which is very similar to Catholicism, except for the fact that it's Protestant. And so it's got a lot of like the robes and the priestly, sort of, what would you call it? Like appointments where someone is a bishop and another person is like a reverend and that sort of thing. So it's a bit traditional, but it is still sort of, they believe in salvation just through faith alone. It's kind of differs from Catholic faith in that way. And I grew up in that household, but it wasn't something that we practiced actively. I grew up in a family where we didn't really talk about religion outside of church. Kind of just went to church to like, do the duty of going to church, but then barely talked about God outside of church. It wasn't until I was about 8 that I picked up one of the family Bibles we had lying around at home. And I was reading the book of Matthew. Like that's kind of the beginning of where I started to personally develop an understanding of God or a relationship with a God, the God of Jesus, the God of like whatever the Bible was talking about. And when I moved to South Africa and I was in high school, I don't know what exactly happened, but I kind of got back into the faith with a little bit more intention. I was very, it just like Jesus kind of revealed himself to me through the word, through different TV programs that I would like watch at night. Again, my family wasn't really Christian at the time, so I was kind of the only one, and it was this cringy eggshell topic that we didn't really talk about, but I was just like, I want to know more about you, God. I want to know more about you. And eventually, once I moved to the States, I kind of had the full freedom to go to church when I wanted to go to church. Didn't have to depend on anyone like being like, you are allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do that. And I just think I've really dedicated my life to him because like everything he's promised has rung true in my life. I've just sensed greater freedom, just a greater sense of peace in my day to day. Even moments when I've strayed, I've always just felt like the word has anchored me back into true freedom, where I can say, no, I actually feel peace. I actually feel calm. I feel collected. I feel mentally stable. All of that just stems back to when I spend time with the Lord, spend time in church, spend time in fellowship with other Christians. He's been very, very good to me. And that's kind of where my faith is at right now.
And is it correct to say you have like more of a spiritual relationship with Jesus? Because I know the older generation, it was sort of like religious, legalistic. It was focused on the traditions, like going to church and reading the Bible. But I don't know. I notice people today, they seem to be having like this supernatural, spiritual relationship with Jesus. Is that correct for you?
I don't know if I would describe it as purely spiritual, because I do think it depends on reading the Bible. It does depend on like physically going to church. I feel like when I do sort of try to make it all like a mental thing, or if I isolate myself, I feel like I start thinking my thoughts are God and start straying. But when I bring it back to the word and I'm like, Lord, what is your word saying today? Like I actively read the Bible every day, like every morning before anything else. And when I just open myself up to the word, I just know that I'm relying on what his word says and not what my mind's thinking I want to do.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think I've heard people describe it. It's like the spirit in you illuminate the scripture. Yes. You can't read the scripture without the spirit. I think that's what I meant.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really interested in like how Christianity, your relationship with Jesus, informs your politics.
I don't actually recently decided not to identify with any political part of the binary. I actually didn't grow up in any conservative or liberal. I didn't grow up with that. It wasn't until I moved up into the States that it was this thing that people have either had to force themselves to transition from one to the other, but you rarely find people who just exist outside of that political binary. So,
they say
relatively.
Yeah. No, carry on.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying they say politics is the new religion, which I think is really interesting.
I definitely think that's a huge, a very true statement, especially speaking to the US. How is it you're based in Australia, right?
Yes. Grew up in New Zealand. I mean, we sort of absorb your culture, really, don't we? I think our politics here, I would say it's less polarizing. But maybe that could just be my own opinion.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, it definitely feels, it's also like we live most of our lives online these days, right? It feels very polarizing, but it's really interesting. And I find myself preempting, because I see woke people post stuff, but when I meet them in person, they're human beings that just have a multitude of opinions and beliefs. And I think it's really weird, the online world. It's crazy. Yeah. In your YouTube videos, I suppose, I'm interested in, your opinion, your political beliefs, some of your values. But you talk a lot about critical race theory in your YouTube videos. But maybe if you can explain what critical race theory is.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be a good place to start.
Long story short, and I mean a huge body of work summarized, it's pretty much different studies. People say that it's just confined to the justice system. From what I've seen critical theory work to be, it's broad. It goes into different sectors and spheres like business, the economy, the justice system. It just finds different ways that race creates different disparities. Say, for example, if there is one study was that of a car dealership. And one of the studies wanted to say if there was discrimination present in different car dealerships and car salespeople, like if they're giving higher rates to Black women or like Black individuals as opposed to like white people. And so they'll go out to find these disparities in different sectors of life, the critical race theorists, and sort of, deduce that, racism is present in these interactions. Like, why else would there be a disparity between this white, neighborhood or this white client or customer? So that's basically what a critical race theorist would describe critical race theory as.
So, but if they're finding disparities,
yeah,
like, what is that not? Are you saying it's not true? Like, there are other variables. It's not to do with race, or what are you saying?
So the problem that I have with critical race theory, while those are interesting disparities, I think they take a lot of the premise of those interactions are dependent on a very conflict theory way of looking at the world, where one group always perpetuates oppression and the other group always just receives the oppression. And I think it has, from those papers, which stemmed from like the 1960s, going to the 1970s, 1980s is really where the name critical race theory comes from, is that people have taken the premise of those theories and applied that into critical social justice, which is where I find more of the frustration from, not necessarily the papers, because the papers lay the foundation from a school of critical theory, which again, that's a whole other range of just discussion.
I mean, we got time. I'd love to hear, like, critical social justice theory. So critical race theory came from that. Yeah. Can you elaborate on what critical social justice theory is?
So it's just critical social justice. Critical theory comes before that. And then before critical race theory, there comes critical theory. So critical theory gives rise to a range of studies. We have gender studies or gender theory, critical race theory, even I think discrit, which is like the critical theory related to people with disabilities. So where you find disparages, and that's because of ableism. And so then out of that, you have people who look at these studies and they kind of create a practical application for how to bring balance to those disparities in everyday life. So that's where we have like diversity, equity, inclusion programs operate off of that premise from these critical race theory studies. And so you try to tell people, hey, based on this body of work, we find that white people tend to have more tendencies to exclude people of color from conversations. And so this diversity, equity, inclusion program is here to bring balance back to that. I think why I find a huge frustration with it is because it sort of predetermines people to certain actions and in fact places labels on people of different skin colors and says, hey, you're most likely to experience discrimination, oppression. If you feel any sort of discomfort in a white space, it's most likely because of racism. If you happen to be white, you're most likely perpetuating white oppression or white supremacy. So we need you to be less of the things that you do. And so I think what I've noticed at least in my American landscape, and a belief that I held on to because I looked out at the world through this lens for a while, is that it sets people up, if you happen to be marginalized, it sets people up to view the world in a very cynical and disempowering way. where like, I can't go into a room with white individuals, say if I was operating out of this lens, and think, oh yeah, like everything's chill here, because I'm constantly thinking, well, as a Black woman, what are the ways that they're going to enact these racial aggressions against me? So during 2020, that feeling, that phenomenon of white supremacy versus Blackness was very, very intense. And I didn't know how else to speak to it in a more like, hey, what if we're all brothers and sisters regardless of skin color? Like when I tried to talk that way, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of disagreement to say, racism is very real. How dare you, try to hinder progress by speaking out against the social justice movement that really just wants to help us. But I found a lot of fault with it, especially through my own experiences, and criticizing that fault was almost as worse as like experiencing some of the judgmental, inclusion sessions that I've been a part of. So yeah, those are the frustrations I have with that ideology.
Yeah, and 2020, I mean, who the fuck wouldn't know this? That was the George Floyd incident.
Yes.
So like everyone, that sort of sparked it off. I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's always overcorrection in some of these movements, but I mean, I don't know. I guess I want to know, what are some of your experiences? Because most people would view it as a good thing. Like things started to change. There was like, I'd love to bring in an anecdote at some point as well. Like there was positive change, and then there was like some people that were a bit nasty. Like, oh, there's too many white people here. Oh, I don't go there. I'm not friends with white people unless they're like really woke. I had a situation at a theater when I was running like a variety night. So I put out an application form. People could apply to be part of it, and then I would pick them. And the manager of the theater said to me, she said, "Hey, just can you just shoulder tap people of color, like just so they feel they're included?" And I don't know. I mean, I read that as I don't know. Are they not capable of filling out an application form? Like, I don't know. That's just how I read it. Is that the wrong way to read it? Would you feel disempowered if I was to say, "Oh, hey, Kimi, do you want this opportunity because you're..." Yeah. I mean, that's the argument between equality and equity as well, right? Like, do you want to fill out an application form to be part of something, or do you want someone to grab you because you are a certain skin color? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So again, another reason why, critical race theory is really hard to talk about is because the papers, their intention is to just find out why there are certain disparities between races. Like, for example, the car dealership example. What happens though is when people are looking for value, looking for identity, and you're overpresented with these ideas, with these themes, with this repetition of you are an oppressed individual, you will always suffer from these slights and microaggressions in this American society, is that you tend to reduce your identity to your race, which is something called like race essentialism, that my skin color accounts for so much that happens in my life. And I think that that's not true. I think you are a full human, whatever color you are, and you are capable of experiencing the range of all humanity, like sadness, love, heartbreak. You can be the oppressor, even as a person with, Black skin color. I can do bad things to other people. I think race essentialism just turns every sort of fault into someone else's or a system's fault. And it depends from person to person. It varies from person to person. So with that race essentialist lens, which is just like, an engulfing sense of identity, just latching onto your race or your skin color, you might feel for a moment like if you came to me and I was looking at the world through that lens, I might feel like, okay, I feel seen, right? However, on the flip side, coming out of this lens and realizing that it makes me feel very cheap, it makes me feel very flat and two-dimensional, I would not feel really respected or valued if you only tapped me on the shoulder because you just wanted to fill a quota, because it would be that I'm not necessarily joining for my sake. I'm joining to make you and your director feel better about themselves. And it's like my presence is only here to make you feel more justified in your decisions, in your fairness. But it's like, why wasn't I asked about my skill set? Why wasn't I asked about the things I can do, the things I can't do? Why is it that my skin color is all you need to see? To me, that feels kind of, it just feels like going back to racism, because you are making judgments based on my skin color. However, that's just my opinion. I'm just like putting it into like my situation. I don't really, this might vary for people.
Yeah, well, I want your perspective. Yeah, and I suppose I wonder if it's similar. I mean, I'm gay, so whenever they put call outs for like theater stuff, I don't know, they just make a point of like, queer identifying artists are encouraged to apply, but it's sort of like, well, I don't want this thing because I'm gay, or like female artist, or like they're trying to correct inequality essentially though. But you view that correction as a disempowering thing.
Yeah, because it pits two camps of people or multiple camps of people against other people. I feel like where we're getting this whole thing wrong is sort of in just saying like, hey, there is an oppressor. There is a group that just naturally fulfills the role of oppressor. There is a group that just naturally fulfills the role of oppressed. And I think that's dangerous because for the person who feels oppressed, it makes it such that you're justified in feeling hatred. You're justified in feeling anger towards the other group. Like if I feel like I've constantly been victimized because of my skin color by white individuals, then that justifies me retaliating, acting out, or, making demands against people just because they're white. And I think that destroys just the human spirit. If you let anger fester, if you let like hatred towards other humans fester, then it works against what we're trying to do in dismantling racism, right? So that's my frustration with even just race as a whole concept. I think we're even moving, it's like we're still trying to entertain the idea of race, but I think a lot of us are so deep into it that we forget that a lot of the goals of like civil rights, like protesters, activists, have always been to deracialize, to come away from the idea of race, because that is it's a social construct, it's a false identity.
Jonathan Haidt talks about it's identity politics. You can use it to uplift people and say, this group of people struggling, we need to uplift them. But you can also use it to weaponize identity and pit people against each other. But I'm just wondering, like, how do you, because you're like saying, eliminate the concept of race, but we sort of need to, if there are disparities between, like, I don't know, men, women, white, black, gay, straight, trans, cis, whatever, if there are disparities between different groups, you do need to elevate them in order to acknowledge the disparity and fix it, right?
I think certain people can handle that, because I think some people cannot handle the idea of falling into deracialization because they cannot see identity outside of race. If there are people who are able to say, hey, I noticed disparities, let's investigate them. I think a lot of the time, especially in America, what people try to address are economic inequality, like purely economic inequality, but they tend to equate poorness with being black, which, first of all, like, that's highly like problematic in and of itself. I think if someone was to say, let's fix whatever is making this, like, whoever's below the poverty line, let's bring them up, let's help them, I don't think you need to speak of that in a way that's racial. I think whoever does happen to be in that class will be better off if you speak to that economic disparity. But when you bring in race, it gets really complicated because there are always going to be outliers. Like, what do you say of like people who are succeeding, who are doing well? Like, Do you just want to, okay, hey, you're doing great. You have an 100K a year job. We're also just going to give you more money. That to them sounds like demeaning of what they have been able to accomplish.
But then you just said it yourself, they are outliers. They are exceptions to the rule.
I mean, that's according to the lens of the people who believe that blackness is always at the bottom. Like when you're speaking to just raising like people who are economically at the bottom, you're going to help everyone, regardless of race. But if you were to classify it like to the people who think blackness equals poverty, to them, they're going to be outliers because that is not true. Like they're going to see people who are lying outside of the graph because it is not true. Like blackness does not equal poverty. However, you can't speak to like the history of racism, like the systemic, like there has been that segregation in the United States. Like one can't deny that. You can't talk about these issues and say that completely didn't exist. Like that was not a thing. But if you're able to, I feel like there are few people who can say, yes, history of America's racism was terrible. And we don't have to be subject to race. Most people will either buy into one, deny the history, or buy into the other and not want to let go of the concept of race and racial classifications. And I think you can always, as an individual, you can always just like decide that those factors do not speak for the entirety of your person, like whatever that is. And sometimes these disparities, like they are found in most cases, but they're also, sometimes they're not, like they're disproved. And so it is a mixed bag as well. Some people only look at data that says, oh, there's this disparity and look, black people are suffering more. But in other cases, it'll be totally flipped. Like when you talk of a minority, like Asian students are making up a large portion of students who are accepted into US colleges, right? So in that case, is it a case of white supremacy? Like what's going on there? So I would rather that instead of looking at races pitted against, whiteness, pitted against Asians, pitted against black individuals, just focus on the category, say like people are struggling in economically or in terms of education, people who fall below a certain line, and work on fixing that rather than equating the race with the problem.
I want to move into your experience of you've talked about being entrenched in the quote unquote cult of wokeness. I'm wondering if you can talk to me about that. Was that before the 2020 or?
That was when that's a whole story on its own. I have a YouTube video. It goes into that. It's like 12 minutes long, but that was in like 2014 when I started my college journey. I moved to the United States in 2013. So like about a year later, mind you, I had also come from South Africa, and South Africa at the time when I was going to school in South Africa, this was about 2007 to 2011. Yes. Yeah. So, it was I was just checking the dates in my mind. It was
it's all good. Don't worry, I'll direct people to your YouTube, okay?
Yeah, no, please check it out, because I really mean like there is a lot more to the story that I don't want to like, I don't want anyone to miss anything because it's complicated. But basically, I grew up in South Africa, and we talked a lot about forgiveness. Nelson Mandela was very, very much an advocate of that, as well as Desmond Tutu. And this is not an anecdotal thing. Like it wasn't a small thing. They mentioned forgiveness one day. I mean, like Desmond Tutu wrote 2 books on forgiveness. One was No Future Without Forgiveness. The other one was The Book of Forgiving. So this was a very big theme in racial reconciliation in South Africa, and something that I thought was absolutely missing from the dialogue in America. But anyway, came to the States, college kind of made me look at the world through the cynical lens, and a lot of that education, like through my general education classes, was based on a lot of the critical theory work and critical social justice, which if you want to think of it in simpler terms, critical social justice is just like, it's like the legs, the application of what you find in the critical race theory studies. So it's like, be less this, make room for this, that, and the third. Normalize this. Like, it's how to act in a way that creates justice for these past wrongs. So I started believing a lot of that. However, I became incredibly depressed, incredibly anxious. And I would wonder, like, why, but I was just reading so many microaggressions. That's a whole other term. Microaggressions meaning like just looking at, like, people looking at you the wrong way, people not having courtesy for you. That all was reinterpreted or interpreted by my brain as further evidence of racism making itself manifest. And yeah, eventually I just felt like it was too much to bear. I couldn't really do a lot. I couldn't cope. And I just sat home at my dining table one day and I was like, Lord, I don't know what to do. Like, you got to help me because I'm so fragile. Like, I can't think. I can't, socialize. I can't go out and just be normal. Like, I see everyone else as being normal. And I just felt like he was bringing to my heart a reminder to forgive and to release offense. And that everything really could be just summed up as I am carrying offense. Whether I believed it to be racist or not. And so I, from that time on, I just started to begin to forgive, even when I felt like people were acting out of, ignorant racism or microaggressing, acting out in ways that I found to be a microaggression. I was like, you know what? I forgive that. I release it. I bless that person. And I love that person. It's kind of like the thing I would start reciting to myself.
Can you give me some of that?
Pardon?
Give me some of that. That's amazing.
Well, I give a lot of glory to God because, again, it was something that really was based on His word and based on, His command to forgive. He says in Matthew 18:22, Peter asks Jesus, how many times should I forgive if my brother sins against me? And Jesus says 70 times, 7 times, which is as if to say, how many times would that be? I can't even do the math right now. There's a lot of times you need to forgive. And so, it's based on His word. And I was like, I'm going to have faith and believe that this is going to work. Like, if this really is God, then I'm going to feel a change. And months down the line, like, it took months, like, from the moment I started to forgive, it felt, relieving. But down the line, it took months to really kind of get my brain back into shape. But then I couldn't see microaggressions anymore. Like, it wasn't a matter of having to forgive all the microaggressions I was seeing. It just turned into the fact that I honestly couldn't see them anymore. So I didn't feel that fragility or that depression or anxiety anymore. And I realized in 2020, this was not a process I started late 2018. By the time 2020 rolled around, summer of 2020 rolled around, I was just like confused by how people were not injecting the forgiveness into their conversations about race and George Floyd and discrimination and reconciliation. I was like, Nelson Mandela talked about it. Desmond Tutu talked about this. Like, those guys fought a version of racism you're probably never going to see in your lifetime. Why won't you ever like bring this up? And I guess that was really my hard departure from wokeness, because it really is this cult where you all have to think the same. And if you step out of line, you suffer tremendously with cancellation. And it was just too much to bear. And yeah.
It does make me feel when people respond in such a harsh way, it doesn't really make me want to understand where they're coming from. As well. But yeah, that attitude of forgiveness is like, so how should we respond to woke people? Because it just pushes us to the other side.
Yeah, I notice it a lot where people are starting to, so there's this in the United States, I don't know if it's happening where you're at. There was a period of time, it's still kind of happening today, but there really was a period of time where everyone was crying racist, like, oh, that's racist, saying this is racist, saying that is racist. And a lot of people started to notice that I was going overboard. Like, not everything can be racist the way you are labeling it to be. It was just starting to lose its meaning. The word racist was just starting to lose its meaning because people just slap it everywhere. because it made them look good. It made them look virtuous. It made them look like, hey, they were looking out for the little guy, whatever that means. And on the flip side, people got tired. They got jaded whenever the word racist came about. So they would slap the term like woke onto everything. Woke onto, like if someone said, oh, this was racist, and it was an over exaggeration, and the person would retaliate with, well, you're just woke. And now I feel like wokeness is kind of becoming the new racist, where everything is woke, and like now we're losing the definition of what woke actually would be referring to, which I think it's something that's very specific, and you can actually, if you do the homework, you can actually learn to define it. I think it exists on both the right and the left, and I would define it as sort of believing in an invisible network of oppression that's working against you. People on the right believe this of the left. People on the left believe this of like white supremacists, and white supremacists would be the conservatives. And so I think you find this like this belief system prevalent on both sides. How do we avoid that? How do we avoid going into extremes? I think just being very critical of our, like, both your and our collective tendencies to honestly want to be right, want to be justified, like want to get revenge. I bring everything back to like the word of God. Like I, as a Christian, that's where I find my balance. Like I honestly don't know how to do relationships, how to do life, how to do friendship without looking to the word for how to navigate that. And it keeps me sane. It keeps me in the middle. It keeps me from turning to any other ideology or camp for salvation, for moral justification, because it exists universally and like eternally. Like they're just principles that are applicable anywhere, anytime, forever and ever.
So we all got to get to know God then.
That's my radical solution. 100%.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I suppose I also want to, I'm sure, I feel like people really want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And, people want to address, discrimination and things in society. I suppose you've probably already explained that. Like, what would you like to see happen more in society? Like, how would you like to see discrimination? Because it does exist. If you just write everything off as woke, I mean, it's easy when someone's talking probably about cultural appropriation, or like, don't say dumb because that's ableist. You can't braid your hair because that's cultural appropriation. Like that kind of stuff. It's just like, that's not even the core of the issue, but it's so noisy that it just makes me think, oh, well, you're not oppressed then, whatever. Like go do something. But it's like, I think there is definitely discrimination in society. And I suppose I wonder, like, how would you like to see it addressed? Critical social justice is the wrong way. What's the right way?
Yeah.
The Bible.
I would say, so social media has really distorted things. I'll speak for myself personally, right?
Yes.
Social media has distorted a lot of things that we take on burdens for ourselves. So like, I will look at, say, like Ben Shapiro as a speaker. I had this period of time where I thought Ben Shapiro was an absolutely like evil, terrible person. And I was like, I need to purge him from my life. Like, in a way, he was someone who was like almost in my life. I wanted to purge him from Twitter. I wanted to get him blocked or removed. It was kind of my mission for a time. But I think we need to, first of all, take a step back from social media and even just like go for like 2 months without being on Instagram, without being on Facebook, whatever, even YouTube. Just be like, hey, I'm doing a purge and I'm stepping away right now. And look at the relationships that are actually in your life. Like, you have teachers, professors, if you're a college student. Take all of those relationships and evaluate them and really ask yourself, who has done something racist to me or microaggressed against me? Who of these people, what have they actually done that I can pinpoint to and say, this person did that thing and it hurt me. And if you can find those people, because I feel like a lot of people, if you were to remove social media, they would realize a huge chunk of feeling oppressed is because you're interacting with thousands of profiles daily, like Twitter, for example. You're looking at all these tweets of people who have nothing to do with your life, and you're feeling like they're all conspiring against you, but like literally they can't touch you. They don't know who you are. So once you remove that, audit like your own friendships, your relationships. Maybe it's family members. Maybe it's like a close friend that says like something that's really, it's kind of like ignorant. I would say go to those people and have actual interpersonal confrontations with them and say like, hey, I just wanted to, get coffee with you and talk about this, something that's hurt me deeply, and I wanted to just bring it up. And the reason I say this is important is I'm going to bring in Desmond Tutu, someone I really think our culture today needs to look at his life and what he's done. He was an activist against apartheid. He was the Archbishop in South Africa in Cape Town. He was part of reconciling South Africa after like a really, really racist, segregated past. So he says he put forth this fourfold path to forgiveness in his book, The Book of Forgiving. And he talks about racism as well in that book too, and that being some of the things that we want to address, right? So I would say follow the fourfold path of forgiveness, where like anyone who is trying to, if you really are about this life and you're like, yo, I don't like racism, I'm trying to fix things, then listen to some activists from the 60s. So, because they know what they're talking about. He says, name the hurt, tell the truth, actually, is the first step. Then name the hurt. Then you have the option to grant forgiveness. That's totally like up to you and your evaluation of the situation. Once you either grant forgiveness or whatever happens after that, you can renew or release the relationship. So if you find someone, say, who you had an incident where they excluded you for something, and you thought, okay, maybe they excluded me because of my race, and that hurts. It's like a sting, like if you are, say, a queer person, and like you had an instance where like you felt like someone didn't invite you because maybe they were offended by your queerness. Have a conversation with that person. And even if it hurts and it's like, this is cringy, I don't want to talk to them. That's the best way you probably will solve discrimination, racism, othering in general in your lifetime. So talk to them, tell them what hurt you, like tell the truth, hear them out. They might not even know what they did, and just hear what they have to say. And then name the hurt, say like, hey, it really hurt me because I don't think I am that person. I don't think I am XYZ, the way I was treated and made to feel. If they do, if there's some acknowledgement, or whether there is no acknowledgement of the wrongdoing, you can offer forgiveness. And that doesn't have to be like something like, I forgive you. Like, you don't have to say like, I forgive you. But you can do it internally. It's most important that it is an internal decision, because that's where it matters. Like if you say with your mouth, I forgive you, but you're still harboring unforgiveness, which is basically just releasing that hurt, releasing that wrong and pardoning them. Make sure you do it in your heart, because that's where it matters most. And then you can like decide, if they don't change, if they keep doing that thing, and it doesn't really, like, it's up to you to decide what your floor is, what your threshold is of hurt and pain. I would say make that as high as possible, because you don't want to be offended by everything, right? You can renew or release the relationship. If this is something that you find like you keep butting heads on this topic with someone, say like if I was in a workplace and my boss was like, you need to relax your hair, like you need to make your hair straight, or you need to like shave it off, but you can't have it like this. You can't wear your natural hair. I feel like that's crossing a boundary. That's kind of racist. It's unnecessary. So I probably will, if I have a conversation with this person and I need to have another conversation and there's no change, I probably will release the relationship. I think I can withhold my expertise in whatever field I'm working in and just take it to somewhere where I'm welcome for who I am. That for me, Melody, is like what I really think will make effective change. Because yelling on social media does nothing. Like, honestly, if you can start interpersonally, then you can do it on a broader scale. Like, that just it is what it is. Like, if you can't do that in your own life, then why do you think you can do that for other people who don't even know you? You can't. So get bold, do it now, do it with the people that you know, because that is the real change. It's the only change that's going to make a difference in your life. So, yeah.
Oh, that was, oh my God. Where can people find more of this stuff? Kimi, YouTube?
Oh,
Of you, where can people find you?
I am on YouTube, Kimi Katiti, just like it's spelt right here, Kimi Katiti. On YouTube, if you type that into search engine, my profile will pop up, my page will pop up. I'm also Kimi Katiti on Instagram. If you do want to find out more about forgiveness, I highly recommend that book, The Book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu. It's so good. And there are a range more other resources that I have listed on my website under the resources tab. I think I still have that up. So kimikatiti.com/resources. You'll find a link. These are all Amazon affiliate links, I should say. But you will find a link to stuff that's helped me. You'll also find a link to free PDFs on critical race theory. So like, I don't want to just criticize critical race theory and like say like, well, you're not allowed to actually look at it for yourself. No, look at it for yourself. Make your own evaluation. You'll find that on my website as well. And a lot more other books that I think have been really helpful for me and I hope will be helpful for other people.
I'll link all that in the show notes and everything, but thank you so much for joining me today. It's been awesome to hear your perspective on things.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad you found it to be enlightening. So thank you so much for having me, Melody. I appreciate it.